Hello, it's a pleasure to introduce to you our last keynote speaker for today, Marie-Cécile Bertau. Marie-Cécile is Associate Professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of West Georgia, and her field of research is language psychology. However, what she does, she looks at language beyond its mainstream cognitive framework, which is largely committed to methodological individualism. Rather, she seeks to understand the psychological workings and effects of language in human life in a deeply pragmatic and dialogic perspective. Voice is a core notion and phenomenon, the sensible moment where the person and the other, the social and the societal, meet and interfere. Marie-Cécile and I met last summer at the conference of the International Society for Theoretical Psychology in Denmark. And when I look back now to August 2019, so much has changed, I have to say, even the way we meet at conferences. Marie-Cécile's work is theoretically driven and interdisciplinary, and her focus is the relationship between language and the self. She has published in 3 languages, English, German, and French, and has contributed to main handbooks within a large field in psychology, such as dialogical self-theory, cultural historical psychology, and theoretical psychology. I'm very, very happy you're here with us today, and I'm looking forward to your talk, Time, the Other, and the Collective Voice, Discernments from a Language Psychological Perspective.
Thank you very much, Irene. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for all of you to be here today. Here is, of course, a metaphor. It's a kind of shared and partitioned here, but still we are here today. And in the same time, although in different times. So thank you very much for organizing this. I can only imagine the huge logistics behind that. And thank you for letting me talk about some thoughts I had. So let me share my screen first. So this is my subject topic today, as Irene mentioned, time, the other, and the collective voice. In my talk, I will propose 2 lines of thinking around 2 of the key terms of this conference, solidarity and everyday life. Solidarity ties into some considerations to the state of exception, a term I took as inspiration from Agamben without going into his theory, which I cannot at this point. Rather, I briefly explore the links between the current crisis and the state of exception. Everyday life is more closely linked into language activities we live every day in several formations and with several others. It is the dignity of these processes and activities that I want to highlight. Here too, due to the crisis, we seem to live a state of exception. Actually, everyday life form is for me the very site of the politics. And language we live and do is for me a key moment. Everyday life and everyday languaging are inseparable. My expertise lies in language that I understand as activity, which needs to be performed and is performed and lived through different types of practices, necessarily including self-other collectives, or swinging movements between you, me, and a third. This activity is dialogical. It is taking place as sensible symbolic formations in time and spaces. It works as movements of address and reply. So dialogical means that any act of languaging is addressed to other. It seeks for the other, and it occurs in the field of a common third that goes beyond you and me, beyond a simple aggregation of eyes. It goes into a public sphere, simply given by the very fact of languaging, in contrast to making noises or sounds. Nobody invents language while speaking, and also everybody speaks uniquely while speaking. So this is said with Humboldt. Tradition, entrenchment, and improvisation go hand in hand when we speak and listen, understand, and not understand. This transgressing instance, granting and forcing articulation in a specific way is the third. And the specificity of the articulation ties into different types and organizational levels of the societal and the social, different forms of we, thus normative. I teach about language and in language as this activity, and I theorize language as this continuous weaving and interfering of the individual, social, societal, present and experienceable through different types of voices we hear and perform. I consider language as a side of the politics. Access to language and acquisition of language forms mean for me possibilities to articulate, to think, to understand, to not understand, to further articulate. Others and the social and societal third as the publicizing instances of articulation are necessary. The cycle of address and reply are informed by these instances, granting both reflection and contact. This is important. It's a mental and an affective, sensible, sensorious duality. Practicing language as activity is practicing the swinging I was just talking about, the swinging I, me, we. Socializing and individualizing, socializing the individual and individualizing the social, the societal. It's from this perspective that I will talk. Further, from the position of a privileged person in the present dominant societies. Let me now start with first considerations to the state of exception. For Agamben, a state of exception is an extraordinary measure where the rule of law is suspended. And he takes it as a paradigm to describe the primal form of modern government. It is tied into security practices and discourses at different levels of the modern state. It generates enemy bodies that are abandoned to spaces of enemies. These specific spaces of exceptions can be further explored as provisional spaces, such as prison camps, refugee detention camps, waiting areas in airports, transit centers near borders. What's the state of exception for us? Meaning the privileged, mostly white people, citizens of dominant countries and dominant languages, possessing enough consuming power that is money to spend. What is it for us now in this exceptional crisis? From what are we accepted? What do we expect to be accepted from? What do we expect to not fall on us, used to fall on others? I think we expect and even more view it as our good right to move and travel wherever and whenever we want, to see and talk with our relatives whenever we want, access to others. Traveling, we take our suitcases back, walking through the airport only as a liminal zone of arriving and being picked up. Not caught there, not suspended, regulated in our moves and contacts, simply conveniently passing through, moving towards our regular others. This is not an accusation, this is an observation. It leads me to align with one of Agamben's critiques, who is indeed very critical about Agamben, but highlights this ethically compelling argument in the state of exception. We must abandon the expectation that security can be achieved by making others insecure. This is where I link solidarity. Exactly from the moment of health and psychosocial insecurity and experience regulations of our everyday life, we might generate a resource of solidarity. We are not forgetting of this exceptional state and waiting for everything to just get back to normal. A transfer of this state now of pervasive insecurity and derangement to our understanding of what we expect, to our blind spots. Not so much a gesture to others we assure our solidarity, more a gesture toward our own ways of living and working, and not forgetting we could support in each other to generate a solidarity that is not othered but inclusive. Let me now turn to everyday life with everyday languaging. So I focus on this cycle of address and reply I take as the key moment of humans as mediated beings, mediated to each other, to themselves, and to their common reality. This cycle generates articulation through different degrees of objectification. I'll explain in a moment. So both articulation and objectification are mental and sensible processes, reflection and sensorial experience. So the cycle of objectification generates a so-called language object as a recognizable entity, such as a concept, worded, voiced. And it leading to, this language object is leading to and is tied into objectivity that pertains to common social and societal language activity types. This is a transformational process describing a movement between subjectivity and objectivity, individual and social, societal, the public sphere. Articulation is its key moment. It works through or functions through the listening, replying other. Again, I'm invoking Humboldt. And this is nothing but voice replies pervaded by publicness, since languaged. Objectification is an act of relating and distancing simultaneously, and it encompasses two inseparable processes. Again, a reflection and a contact, a reflection of self towards and for otherness and publicness, so directed to, addressed to that, and a lived contact between self and otherness, publicness. As Vygotsky put it so well, almost 100 years ago, 1925, consciousness is social contact with oneself. We live in language as our medium to articulate our mediatedness to other self and reality, and we have our language as object among other objects. This is the duality of medium and means, or medium and tool. And there is a striking structural similitude to the living body, to living a body, our body, and having a physical body. Time. In the process view I adopt, time is key. Language is a time and form sensitive process we live through, and objectification as movement in time requires time simply for me to think, to articulate, for you to listen, to reply, for me to understand. Time to talk and listen, to think, to write, to be silent, to read. Time to experience and practice forms of contacts provided by different types of language activity with different others. It's very simple and effective, but fragile if we take time away. Articulation breaks and contact disrupts. Time for spaces. So the movement of language activity requires space too, of course. We are not speaking heads making information travel. Rather, our voices travel and physically and psychologically touch. We move and gesticulate, we occupy places and display postures, moving away, turn and return. They might be bystanders, overhearers. We might be those bystanders and overhearers. We enter and leave a scene, different scenes with different others, necessary physical and social psychological transitions between different degrees of publicness. I think this is really an important point to add, to really have in mind that we need to go and to leave. And these marked transitions are repositioning, depositioning, repositioning all the time. And this is necessary to have the full mediatedness, let's say. Space-times of language are affecting us in a present moment. We can distend space-times, but distending space-times requires good grounding. We need practices and coming back. So teaching online, we need good practices of really actually meeting others, our students, our significant others, our interesting others, our enemies, whoever, right? So going there, coming back. The other to self, the other seeked for by self, desired. The other speaking as unique individual and as a representative of the collective with its languaging practices. I do not only speak as myself, but I speak as a keynote speaker and in English, not in French, not in German, not in Kiswahili, not in Urdu, but in English. So there is this moment of representing this collective language in language practices. So through our language activity, the you and me opens up both into intimacy and publicness. Both become possible and articulable. So the swinging you, me in each other's language happens, and continuous contact through each other's voiced words. The other leading to the we is granting continuing socialization. It's also being witnessed and witnessing. This is something we miss tremendously when working alone, remotely. Being with others, we could just listen and witness. Now I will take a notion from the philosopher Volker Schürmann and apply it in a simple, even simplistic way to the current crisis, the notion of the space of meanings. Its most important feature is that this space defines certain categorical limits so that any statement and any conceptualization within that space is defined. Exactly not definable by the actors within the field, within that space. The space defines what can be talked about, it defines the candidates of our talking or discourse, if you prefer. Schürmann calls this passive structuring. So it's categorical formatting. This is how he calls it, right? I have this on my slide. So it formats our categories. Let me give you briefly Schürmann's simple example. The utterance, a horse is not a prime number. This utterance is not within the meaning space defining talking about numbers, math at large. I might add that we would need to construct another space of meanings to grant horses a candidacy to determine numbers, a space such as in Alice in Wonderland. It's exactly Wonderland and is specified as that. So the space of meanings provides the actors with candidates for which interpretations are applicable at all. Of course, we are facing dominant or master discourses here. The point is that these are not negotiated within the space of meanings, but passively structured by that space. thus determining any possible talking and the meanings, the candidates. A final remark to the space. A space of meanings resides on an ethos. Changing such a space requires to shift the ethos, not to work at single meanings. Crises reveal that power not the least in making time so very urgent that we are caught into spaces of meanings that redefine a space of meanings we took for granted. Listening to the contradictory voices, just as anybody, all of you did the previous weeks, listening to these contradictory voices about the present crisis, I came to understand the following competing spaces of meanings that seem to meet and interlace violently in our bodies and in our languaging, in us as persons. On the one hand, I'm starting with the left side, sorry. We have the physical body, an object of measures, like in conventional medicine, in security, in control operations. Language is here considered an information carrier, and it needs working channels for its best transmission, like we need really a good, clear internet, right? This space is tied into a substance view of ontology, let's say, or in general, a substance view. Forms are considered still forms. On the other hand, the right side, we have the lived body, living and dying bodies with others. We have form of life, forms of communication and exchange between persons. Language is lived as contact to others and self. And we have here the necessity of common space-times, which I consider irreducible. This side is committed to processes and dynamic moves. Language would be an in-between, as I theorized, and not an inside the brain or single individual. What I understand is how we are caught in between the competing spaces, oscillating between physical bodies who need medicine and living bodies who need others, and languaging. Moreover, we are led into conceiving of this as dichotomy, either physical or lived body. Or the lived social body can be there, but is granted acknowledgement under the condition of being an object of measures itself, serving in turn the logics of infinite progress. Time becomes critical at this point. So continuing the competing spaces, I see again on the left side, the commitment, the belief in infinite progression and growth, the necessity to control humans and goods. Time is time of producing and consumption. Production, I would have to say. Time is production and consumption. And shortening time is an aim because time is a good. On the other hand, on the right side, you have a holding of progression, a slowing down, acts of reprise and repetitions going back and forth, redundancy, as information theorists call it, redundant for information theory, but it's vital, existentially vital for languaging activities. Time is not time of producing or production. Time is to live and die in cultural, historical, and social forms that are entangled with language activities. Living, we are living and experiencing time as short. So there is this feeling of urgency. I hear, for instance, in Greta Thunberg's voice, I hear in Fred Vargas' voice, I hear in so many youngsters' voices, I hear in so many of your voices when we meet the sense of urgency, but it's tied not into a shortening of time, into a reduction, into a good, but into exactly that living and experiencing moment. So to the blue words, we can see here the overarching powerful competition between mutually exclusive opposition I call growth or death. So grow or die. This is the logics. On the other side, it's an end. It's living and dying. Entangled, mutually interrelated, interdependent. Dignity. Everyday language practices of several kinds performed by people coming together, transiting, arriving, leaving, touching each other in this commonly lived space-time of language. These practices have for me a very simple and clear dignity, a dignity we lose when reducing bodies to physical ones and when reducing language to information transfer. A dignity closely tied into time and the other, opening up to a public sphere that, in turn, is needed to have any democratic form of politics happening. Advocating for this dialogical performative notion of language and insisting on talking and listening embodied persons to each other, I'm worried that the state of exception conceptually linked into the current crisis leads to entrenched habits as ways of thinking and doing that are not serving us as political beings. This is a representation of what I call the social slice. So one side you see what you see when you are online with a person, right? And on the other side you see the slice, what's sliced. It's funny and it's tragic. I do not want us to become social slices of ourselves, gradually desocialize maybe, or entrench this slice life as the default life. Besides this view of the person and looking back at the state of exception, I'm also thinking about what Membe calls the operations of partitioning time and atomization of space, belonging to neoliberalism. To which time and spaces are we already partitioned and atomized? Not only in the crisis, I'm meaning, right? As a teacher at the university, I'm not against working online, but against a far-reaching confusion, taking language as information transfer, where embodied persons are a kind of contextual addition, a kind of cozy and fine surplus. This is a terrible confusion. Embodied persons meeting each other in actual time spaces are not this addition, not that surplus. Rather, they are necessary to human beings as related, sensuous, symbolic beings. I'm concerned about a fatal substitution obeying crisis, states of exceptions, and capitalistic exigencies. Language is the key moment of our interrelatedness and interdependency as embodied persons in the political sphere. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marie-Cécile, for your very wonderful and inspiring talk. And thanks also for giving us a lot of connections to our current kind of everyday remote life and also teaching on a more general level. I would like to take a moment to remind our participants you can use the Q&A tool to submit your questions. Most of you probably already know how that works. For the others, please look at the very bottom of your screen. There is a menu bar and it says Q&A. Just open it up, please, and type in your questions. and then I will read it to Marie-Cécile and ask the question on your behalf. So while the questions are coming in, it's my pleasure to ask the first question. I would like to pick up where you kind of left it, and I would like to, again, I tried to memorize it correctly, go to this wonderful picture, the slice, the social slice. It's really impressive because I think we kind of find ourselves probably in this picture, like the one aspect, the one picture we see when we look into the other's home as we see it on screen, right? And then what we know is, and as you said, it's at the same time funny and tragic, because what we could see on your picture is that there's also some aspects of neglect probably, right? Like some dirt, some chaos, something that we just left aside and didn't focus on. So I was asking myself, if you started out with saying like language is activity and language is lived through different practices, including self-other collectives. So, and then you kind of finished with the embodied person, right? And language as something embodied. What roles do the bodies play under the COVID-19 circumstances and the lockdown in our everyday remote lives? So we are in 2D, that's 2D screens, and you're talking a lot about, like, you know, the gestures and the movements and everything.
Of course. Yeah, of course we are reduced bodies also. I mean, I'm sitting here normally, I would walk around, I would be, you know, you see only this this slice, right? So I would be moving around, and I would be also a more public body, since I would be in a common sphere, like a conference room or whatever. So I would embody maybe a different person. So I try my best, right? I have shoes on, I have, yeah, I put everything in order, and I try to not create this social slice. And I gesture, but I know that my hands are not reaching into the slice, the screen, right? So it's here, and maybe you saw it sometimes, but not as I'm doing normally. So just from my person. So of course the body becomes more a still body, according to this idea of a still form, you know, this privilege of the still form. And the Western European school system is very much a disciplinary operational apparatus to make still bodies. So we are back to these school desks somehow, right? And tied into them all the time. It's also our working desks, because we have to be frank. It's also the situation we are working. I am so happy to have to be able to go into classes and to leave them again and go home and back. So not now, right? But normally. But we are already extremely reduced, those who work like we work, right? To not forget those working at the so-called working front, like in grocery shops, in hospitals, cleaning. So this is a different kind of work, but the information society we created, the whole big class of middle class, middle whatever, is working on the screen. So this is something which happens already, and we get used to it, and we are made used to it, and we discipline ourselves also to do that. And my final sentence, as many of you experience a very deep fatigue of that. I'm so done with clicking and watching and talking in this way. I'm not here, I'm not there, I'm not with you, Irene, which I would love to. I'm not with Coney and not with my students. I really miss. We are not here. We are internet packages. And if the internet breaks, we are nobody. We are just disappearing.
But at the same time, technology gives us like kind of the tool to actually meet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would not say let's get rid of technology and back to the cave or back to, I don't know, back to nature. No, no, certainly not. I need the technology to meet you, Irene, and to meet my people in Europe. That's absolutely true. But the point is, to what kind of life are we getting used, and do we what what do we but how can we become aware of where we're going? What choices do we have, and what those choices do we make ourselves available just by consciousness and awareness, and then of course by actions, or actions and non-consciousness. I mean, it's both, right? So it's not to say, oh, technology, but it's to say, how, when, and what kind of life do we want to have? And all the parents, like many of us, we have small kids, are each day have to decide how much, what, when. And these are existential moments. It's not just about, okay, let's do something like that. It's an entrenchment of a habit. It's changing us profoundly. We know that from studies, right? It changes the functioning of the brain, and it changes the social relationships, of course. Read Turkle. I mean, there are so many people saying that. So we have to take, as how can I say that, decisions as aware as possible, and together we have to talk about that and becoming clear about, oh, it's so difficult to not do that. It's so difficult to work at home and not by night, right? I work by night, not all days, but many days. Why do I do that? Why? Who told me work by 9 p.m.? Nobody told me, but it's this entrenchment going on, right?
Thank you. There's a lot of questions coming in, and I would like to start with Antonia Laren's one. She says, hi, Marie-Cécile, and thanks for this beautiful talk. My question is social slicing also part of languaging in terms of taking and sharing specific perspectives and points of views? Language is the contrary of a totalizing unit, but the ongoing production of unity is never fully reached in a way. So why is it so different now?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand everything fully, but of course, I think, Antonia, you are struggling with objectification, language objects, and the objectification of the body, or the reification into this slice, right, into the social slice. So, of course, language is creating elements, and this is its power, right? So we have this articulation. I'm not singing, I'm not making sounds. I produce articulated words which are conventional and symbolic, and you can understand. Of course, this happens, and it has to happen. So there is structure, there is discernible entities, and this is needed. And I would not say that talking only about certain things, or embodying certain genres is slicing. I would not say that. It's really, for me, the slicing that operates is not on the how can I say that? So it's not because language is working like that, but because we make our body and languaging make it working like that. So in that social slice situation, so we can reduce a lot. And we have this transfer idea of information, and we think that's fine. I had just to give my information, that's right. And we know that's not enough, because we have these structures, but these structures need the gesture, need, I know you, Antonia. And I'm so happy about that, because I know, or I imagine, where you could ask, where from you could ask, right? We had practices, and we will continue to have practices. And my thesis is that we could not have done all this only remotely. There would be something missing, but not in our languaging, in our complete embodied languaging social societal practice. I hope that's the answer for you.
Also, thank you. I think it's very interesting to also talk about like how different it is to actually know who asked the question, right? Like you have some context information and it makes an actual difference. And I just realized I never thought about this while doing this, reading out questions and the name, that it actually makes a difference when we know where somebody's coming from.
Can I just give a short comment on that?
Absolutely.
It would be so awesome somehow to have a meta-analysis of the conference. Because, you know, what's for me very specific is that I don't know the audience. I don't know how far reaching is it, how small it is, and nobody of you knows. We don't know each other. We cannot witness each other. We have, I see two acting people and two symbols. So there is this kind of smog where like you don't know where you are. And as I said to Irene yesterday, knowing her, and she's my anchor. She's my anchor in this indiscernible multitude. And this is so important. Otherwise, we feel it's difficult to not get lost, right? We are all professionals, so we can just grab other experiences and then do it. But think about your students. My students, they get lost. They are not structured. They don't find the structure and how to do that. And they are just falling apart online. They are absolutely unhappy. So I'm not falling apart because I have so many practices I can rely on. And I can rely on Irene. And I know that Antonia will be there, some of my students, some of my really beloved people. Yeah, so this makes really a significant difference.
Thank you. As Alfonso Williams asks, thanks so much for your talk. In our accelerationist culture that monopolizes our time, an element impossible to retrieve or reconstruct, language becomes cut shorter and shorter. What do you feel will happen when we have almost literally no time to speak, where our daily actions dismiss spoken language altogether?
This will be terrible. So it will be terrible, of course. I'm laughing, but it's really tragic. If we can't do that, I think we will really totally de-socialize and depoliticize. So in the very basic sense, right? We need to do that. And we will, so I don't like to speak like an oracle, but you know, you can see traces of that maybe already if you have read Sherry Turkle's work on how people in different generations, not only the young ones, but different generations get anxious about face-to-face talking. So this anxiety and the formula of social anxiety becomes so, I hear it all the time in America. Of course, it's a position. I have social anxieties, right? But of course, it's also a symptom. So I think this is really, and this is why I spoke of dignity. This is where the dignity of the practices is, of course, our dignity, but not as single persons or as extremely general human rights. I can take that, but I would like to locate it, anchor in the immanence of the everyday life. We need to speak to very different others and just be walking around, passing by people, talking, we listen, going somewhere we don't understand a word, but we were just witnessing, like starting to study something or starting a new work, right? Starting learning a language, all that. So we need to do all that. We need to be in this plurality of voices. So terrible and devastating for humanity, I would say, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Ines Langermeyer asks, your voice creates a nice representation of language activity. Also, excellent presentation. Isn't it interesting that voices can be so powerful in terms of creating space-time, But of course, I agree, the possibilities to react and to interact as a we are a bit restricted.
Thank you, Ines. Appreciate it that you are here. I know Ines too, you know, it's just like, yeah, it's fantastic. I know all these so intelligent people thinking about that, and that helps a lot. It's this moment of solidarity I cherish also doing this. I was not sure about doing such a conference because of the format and because I don't, yeah, it's different things. Anyways, yeah, I totally agree. And it was more a comment, so I can only reaffirm that. Yes, the voice has a tremendous effect. And it's not only an effect for others, it's an effect for ourselves. And it's not only physical, it's sensorial, and it's psychological. It's really a touch over space. So through all your devices, my voice touches your ear channel and all the little things and electrifies your brain, right? So there is really a touch, and there is also this affective moment. And this is something really to consider for teaching also more. It's not only rhetorics, it's the connectedness to the other, and we have to take care of that. It's not just happening because I say things they will understand. This form, the how, the moving of the body and the distances and proximities, this is so important to the teaching moment, and it's important to any, I would say, any interaction moment, and it's particularly important for the teaching moment. I need to turn my back and go to the front again. I need to go into the rows. I need to go to a certain student having a single conversation, the others listen. You know, all these forms, right? I need to, yes, we need to, I'm sorry, we need to, of course, yeah. Thank you, Ines.
Connie Constanza Garrido would like to ask a question, and we have this weird situation that she's helping us out with technology. Thank you very much, Constanza, at this point. And we have that weird constellation tech setup that when you're a host in a webinar, then you can actually see all the questions, but you cannot ask a question yourself. So this is why you don't see Connie's question, because she has to ask somebody to type in her question. Enough with the technology stuff. I will just read out the question. Thank you for such a delightful talk. I was wondering where would misunderstanding locate itself in a dialogical activity? As Henri Lefebvre states, living dialogue illuminates a misunderstanding, and that misunderstanding renders dialogue essential yet difficult in everyday life. Considering this moment of crisis, we witness this misunderstanding. Could you speak to this?
Yes, of course, Connie. Thank you for the question and the nice remark. I was purposefully saying understanding and not understanding. So first of all, in a dialogical view, understanding is not a perfect match like this, right? It doesn't exist. And fortunately, it doesn't exist, because if it would exist, like you decrypting, decoding exactly what I'm saying, you would have no freedom or individuality, uniqueness to your understanding. So this is where dictatorships move to. So they monologize the whole language and the thinking. So saying, our freedom lies in having this border protected all the time and selling red flowers only to blonde people. And this is entrenched a lot of times. So this will feed exactly your consciousness. Okay, so this is where you want to have this match. Nobody tries and do other things, right? You don't want to. But from a dialogical perspective, so there is no match, fortunately, and this is why we communicate at all, right? We need to understand, and not only the other, we need to understand ourselves. So while talking to you, I understand also what I'm saying. My intentions and my understanding are happening through your question. This is why I would be happy to see your face and not only to your picture. Okay, side remark. So understanding is not matching, and not understanding is it's a genuine part of understanding. And misunderstanding, you can also take misunderstanding. Not understanding is maybe more radical, but misunderstanding is also part of that, of course. The German psychologist Hans Hörmann, he was working in the 70s and 80s. He said, you were understanding at the wrong world side, falsche Weltstelle, at the wrong side of the world. So you were directed with your understanding at the wrong side. And you will ask me, well, what are you meaning? Or you don't ask me and you realize like tomorrow or 10 years later or never that you were at the wrong side, right? But this is totally part of it. I would never presume that people exactly understand what I say. How could I dare? And it would not be interesting, and I would be lost as an individual, or you as an individual. So the friction, the not matching is key, right? Okay, now you want to know more about that in terms of the crisis. I must say, this puts it puts me in a difficult situation. I don't know exactly what you're meaning. And I think, like, coming back to Ines, we really need to be able to go back and forth to each other. What were you meaning? What are you saying there? And the manufacturing of meanings is so easy on these remote things. We are sliced, and then we have all these ongoing messages and media, etc., where meaning is manufactured. I'm thinking of Chomsky's movie, Manufacturing Consent. And it's old, but it's extremely living, I think, and very important still. So, and I'm reminded of myself, like talking like Socrates against the books, leave this, and you cannot ask a book for what it's meant, right? Yes and no. So we need to read and we need to leave the book. We need to be remote and we need to leave the remote. We need to get in touch, okay? To eat together, to have a party together, to not understand and just leave the place and saying, oh, this is a stupid person, come back, whatever. Life. I mean, that's life, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Floor van Amfen says, thank you so much, Marie-Cécile, for your reflections. Fortunately, having met you in person before, some embodiment still resonates in this peculiar way of coming together. So she is also talking about what we had before, right? Do you think that in knowing that you are addressing embodied and once more fully experienced others and hopefully meeting each other in the future again, there is some, let's say, consolation? So as long as there are still possibilities to connect in person, can this somehow carry into the more disembodied communications we experience now?
Irene, can you please repeat the name? I didn't get it.
Floor van Elfen.
Okay. Oh yes, Floor, of course. Thank you, Floor. Yes, absolutely, consolation, a lot. I mean, but we need to take care of it, right? We really need to get back. So this flexibility. We can do the remote, we can do the distending time and all that, but we need to get back. So we cannot just evade into abstractness, into bodies, so bodily abstracted, but also language, taking language as only abstraction. Language is more, it's an abstraction, it's a presentation, it's a symbolic world, but it's also anchored. It needs to be re-anchored where we are. So if you read Bühler, this is a good lead to understand how language is still in some way faithful to where we are anchored. he has that, Bühler has that idea of the faithfulness of language to the presented reality. In Cassirer is completely detached, right? So language is completely in an ideal way, world. So the immanence of language, at the same time symbolic. So this is so interesting point about language. And definitely consolation because of this exigency of language. So we need to go back. So provide each other with possibilities to go back as often or as needed as possible. Provide your kids. This is really important. Provide your kids, your students. Provide yourself. Don't think you are not in need of others. You are just a mental, you are so practiced in this mental world. Of course we are. But this dries us out and we need to get in contact, really. And I remember meeting you, Flora, and laughing together, and having some wine and beer, and it was just fine. Yes. And this is part of the memories and of my voiced words. It's there, and it's somehow very trivial, and it's very deep. For me, it's really very deep, and it tends to be overlooked. Either we fall into the body trap, somehow saying, oh, it's all embodied in emotions, and then we have all this box, or that if we say, oh, it's very abstract and symbolic and that, right? And we put language in this side. And if we have poetry, theater, we're saying, okay, this is part of the emotional box, right? But let's make a separation. This doesn't work. We really have to put this together again. So rhetorics, theater, poetics, and logics. So what Aristotle did with his books, not only him, but let's blame him for a moment, separating language into these boxes, and with it body and voice and performance and abstraction and symbolics, detachments, right? This is something we can rethink, and in our practices just do together. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to take the opportunity to remind everyone, and also myself, that we cannot have wine or beer together on Slack. However, what we can do is to do the back and forth and try to figure out whether we share an understanding of something, and figure out some more questions or answers. So I would like to invite everyone, after the discussion is finished today, to go on Slack and continue it. Yes. Sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, I'm sorry. No, you didn't interrupt me. I just was forgetting to say something. So I assume that the presentation will be also available, because what I wanted to add is that this very nice, tragic, funny drawing was made by a person I love very much. It's my sister. So the credits go to her. She's mentioned in the credits. I have also important inspirations to this talk. And here are really also not mentioned in the talk, but very important for me. So please look at that also. And then you have the readings and further readings. So just to give you a notion of where the beauty lies. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Gordana Jovanovic says, thank you, dear Marie-Cécile, for your so strong ethical interpretation of language, or better languaging. From that perspective, it is difficult even to image, for example, not listening to the other, perverting the expressed intentions, or pure lies, to mention just a few examples. From my periphery, I can also add political invention of language, or not being at home in one's own mother tongue. How to understand that it is possible, what one poet said, a too strong word has killed me. I would like to hear your comments on that.
A too strong word?
A too strong word has killed me.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Gordana. Yes, it's not my mother tongue neither. It's not my home country neither. I feel very alien here. So Georgia, right, USA, and we shared about that already. So I don't know if I'm where you want me to go. If not, maybe you can give Irene a sign. Uh, how can we not do this, right, with the other? How can we not listen? How can we not be listened, right? How can it not be that the ethics I'm advocating for is not listened to? This is how I understand you, and the pain in that. And I think all of us have this painful moments, and I hope not too many of them. The painful moment of not being listened to, the painful moment of not finding another who listens and replies to you, the desired other just not being there, just departing, abandoning you. Yes, this is how we humans do that. And this is specifically how individualistic, Western, white people do that. There is this terrible reification and separation going on all the time. And this is, you can go back into history, you know that. And it's work. I mean, it's not just like coming like this. You have to do something for that. It's psychic energy. You have to teach and entrench yourself. And this happens, for instance, in schools. From the very first grade on, we teach each other to not listen to each other. There is a complete wrong ethics for me. There is a detachment, a separation ethics going on with this body sitting still, right? What's that invention? I mean, okay. So we work at this each and every day. And we have so many cultural practices supporting these. And we have also a lot of gains out of that, right? Some gains are into thinking for yourself, etc., and just obliviating the other and making yourself great. I'm not so sure about that gain, but there must be some. Anyways, I want to say that the forgetting the other and forgetting your desire for the other is a cultural, social, societal exercise we are so good at, and we have to go back to ourselves. This is why I'm throwing us to ourselves, right? To not do that. Thanks.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. James says, thanks, Marie-Cécile, for such a wonderful presentation. I'm eager to know your thoughts. I guess that prior to the modern age, substance philosophy or psychology was en vogue, giving rise to colonialism, etc. Do you think the new generations are going back to imbibe substance psychology, especially after COVID-19? So are we going back there?
I mean, substance philosophy pays. I mean, it's just how it works well, because it's totally in accord with capitalistic neoliberal operations, the basic operations of designating, identifying entities, I would wanted to say entities, putting them, partitioning them into spaces which are also entities, and yeah, so all these exceptional spaces. So it can be that we come back. I hope that we do not come back with the crisis. The crisis seems to invite even more entification and reification of all kinds. That's true, and this is why we do this conference, I think, right? Is really to keep a living moment alive and to reclaim it, or to say, but we were there already. We were already in a crisis. We're just seeing the symptoms so much more clearly now. As I said, it's not just yesterday with the confinement that we started to be glued on our screens and to disregard our children, and that mothers and fathers and significant people up to babies are walking around with a phone. it's not just yesterday, it's years. So yes, philosophically, it's really a problem, I would say, or ethically, it's a problem for psychology. But there are also many people who are going into another direction, and this conference gives me a lot of hope. And there are also a lot of everyday people. I talk to my friends in Europe who are not scientists, who see the crisis, and this is also a meaning of the crisis, to to invent something productive and take it as a resource. And this is, of course, this is the critical moment, distinguishing. We don't want that. Let's do this. But it needs the courage to say that, not only to others, but to ourselves, and then to practice. And this is tedious, yes. But I would definitely say we have the critical moment. It opens there and there. So let's do it, right? We have to do it, the process.
Lina is asking, in terms of language, you suggest still life forms and was unsure the direction of your thinking here. What are such forms of communication that are still? Are these forms of language or bits and bytes that currently circulate in the social in such a way that touch and therefore transform others into still or frozen subjects?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Very nice question. By still form, I mean that, so just the form notion in general of a substance philosophy is the form is, let's say, a container for a meaning to come in, a container for any substance to come in, right? So it's a kind of envelope or a container, like three-dimensional container. And you just pour something into it. It's there, it's a ready-made, to take a word of Andy Warhol. It's a ready-made and it's ready, and you just take it. It's ready in your competence, it's ready in your environment, and you put things into. So this is a still form. And the very model of that thinking is still bodies, I would say. There was a kind of branching in the time of Goethe and later, so 18th century around, where also we began first, how is that called? So opening dead bodies to look how the human body works, how is that, you know what I mean? So understanding the human body on the ground of a dead body lying there, not moving, right? So you have the architecture of the body, which is the structure and the form. This is totally different than what Goethe advanced in his morphology, where you have dynamic forms developing. So this is the romantic thinkers. So there is a different thinking of form. And when you take this for language, you will land between Saussure, or what Saussure is colported for or transmitted as, and let's say Humboldt and the dialogist. So Humboldt is very much in this dynamic form idea. And the forms are dynamic because they are in time and space and change and stay same every time. So my talking now is totally unique. And at the same time, I use forms that are known by everybody. Otherwise, you could not understand me. I can introduce something, but I cannot say, what? This would not work, right? So I have to stay in English. So, and then if we look further into development, orthodox linguistics tend to see language structurally with certain forms like morphemes and phonemes and words and sentences, and all is well defined and put together in a kind of atomistic generative way, and then you have language. So this is in contradicting this, you have the dialogical view of language, where forms are formations in time, and the form has an independent value towards the meaning. It's the moment of contact and touch to reality, because you hear me, you have the sound, the rhythm, and this makes something. And if you were 3 years old, I would talk to you differently. And if I were at a cafe with friends, I would also talk differently. And this is the moment of the contact and the touch. So, and it's done in time. So really this whole idea of form is so tremendously interesting if we look into that. And again, we would need the arts. We would need much more performance arts and of music and of theater to understand what form is, at least. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Probably the last question for today. Niklas Kimiri says, thank you, Marie-Cécile, for complex and yet very approachable talk. And by the way, I really love your colorful wall carpet. Now to my question. I understood you correctly. Caring for others and the world, solidarity requires touching others and the world, and then may require traveling the world in order to share more than slices of one another, right? But now we're faced with crises that challenge this form of caring, that seem to demand not to touch others, social distancing, and not to travel or to travel less, both due to pandemic and ecological concerns. How may this kind of caring from a distance affect the solidarity you are envisioning on a longer run?
Yes, that's true. So it will affect it. And so this is why we have to act consciously towards this kind of solidarity, to keep it alive, to transmit it, to remind ourselves, okay, this is needed to be taken care of. And we have, I hope you not live alone, but you have a husband or kids or a friend or some friends around. You maybe have a neighbor, you can talk in a distance. So social distance is physical distance, as many people pointed out already, and we have to deal with that physical distance. We can, and many people do work at how we can be socially together while not physically very much in touch. And I think we can be inventive about forms of having a physical distance, but still seeing each other in the same time and space, not remotely. And also people did that also, but we are facing really a difficult moment for that. We have to remind ourselves to go out for a walk with a mask. How you practice, I don't know, but go out and see others. Already seeing others is so interestingly comforting. I don't know if you experience that. So we have to take care of that, and it will affect us. And we might have many traumatized people, and I'm particularly thinking of kids, of small children, and also adolescents who are so in need of sticking, really gluing together. How do they do that? How do they manage? And we will have to understand this and support them, and not just go back to normal, of course, and reclaim, be clear, this is something we need, and we will still need more, and not having more online, and what they call digital prosperity. So working for having broadband to food deserts in America, I find this somehow sarcastic, because you need the food deserts. There are also food deserts and education deserts. So providing broadband is maybe not the first step. Maybe it is, I don't know. But I feel there's kind of gap here. We need to be aware and to act politically towards that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for the great questions. And thank you, Marie-Cécile, for your wonderful talk and for being with us and discussing. And maybe we can continue this discussion on Slack. I would be very happy about that. Thanks to everyone. Have a lovely evening, afternoon, morning, depending on where you are. And hopefully see you again tomorrow at the next day of the conference. Thanks to everyone.